That in my,
Sorry, it's so loud. I don't know if you can turn it down.
Molly, I'll just ask you
Yeah.
to flip as I'm going on. Thank you
Yep.
very much. So I thought I'd put together, during our discussion last time, Elizabeth Webbing came up as a hot topic. That's why I think we wanted to focus on that during this meeting. And so I just put together a couple of slides. So I think what I'll plan to do is cruise through them and then open it up. So the way I have the structure, there's a couple of background slides just to reorient us to what we're talking about. So I'll go quick through those. And then what I did was there were a bunch of questions that came up at the last meeting that were under the theme of Elizabeth Webbing. So I peeled those out and I basically put each question on a slide, and then I'm offering my response to them, and that's what we can talk about. So that's what the plan is here. So next slide, Molly. So this I showed last time. It is exactly the same slide as last time, but I thought was a good, nice overhead of some of the ideas that we're thinking about with Elizabeth Webbing Dam. So there's the dam. It's a complicated dam. It's got a really sharp horseshoe shape to it. There's a couple of opportunities for where fish passage can occur. There's that blue polygon there would be something that kind of runs right along the riverbank there. The one that right now seems like a really good option is the kind of greenish polygon there, and that would be a nature-like fishway that would go through what was the powerhouse for the hydropower facility at that site. And so, we'll talk more about these ideas. I just wanted to reorient people to the site and kind of river right, river left, what we're looking at here. One other thing, Molly, if you can, actually, before I flip, just a couple of quick things about funding as well. And I said this last time as well. We had put in a grant to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We've heard back on that one already, that we did not get it. But we have some existing funds that we're using, and I think John will give a little more detail on that in a bit. So more to come on both the options for fish passage at the site and the funding as well. So now you can flip, Molly. So this I thought was interesting to show. These are the actual property holdings of DEM plus a recreational easement. And actually the recreational easement I thought was the coolest part of this, because when I saw that I was caught off guard. I thought that was interesting. And there may be a couple of reasons for why that exists in that way. But the green polygon on the map there, that is what DEM owns. So a little piece of property on river left where the abutment is, the dam itself, and then a decent chunk over on river right. And that's where the powerhouse is. But I think an important aspect of this is it's not just the powerhouse. It kind of creeps along the edge of the parking area there. And then there's like a little landing. Some of you probably are familiar with it. I wasn't until I visited the site, but there's a little kayak canoe landing there on the north side of that picture. And so, along with fish passage, I think we have a real opportunity here to enhance some recreational usage and some portage around the site. And so we're really going to think about that with you all as we're kind of working through, the ideas with the dam itself, but also some recreational opportunities at the site, because I think it's really ripe for doing something really cool. And so just to hit on this recreational easement, I think the pathway there is to allow cars kind of in and out to the site, but I think what you have to do at the site is if you come into that landing spot, I think you have to go out and walk along the road before you can get back into the river. I don't know that for a fact, but
To go around Elizabeth Webbing itself?
Say that again?
To go around Elizabeth Webbing itself?
Yeah.
What we did before was we just walked through the parking lot and then put in the parking lot right below it.
Down the hill.
Yeah, it's not a great put in spot. It's pretty steep.
Yep. So anyways, I think we can make that better.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. So this now gets into the questions here. So this is a repeat from last time, but this was one of the questions, so I wanted to hit on it. Folks who are wondering what the status of the FERC license application is at this site. So there is an application for a FERC license at Elizabeth Webbing, but that's the steps. It's just an application, and what's happening right now is they're going back and forth with various agencies to understand the types of surveys that will be needed before any sort of allowance would be given from those particular agencies as part of the FERC process. That includes DEM, but also U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA as well. So that's what's going on right now. I will also note, I mentioned this last time as well, but we are crafting a letter to send to FERC outlining our plans for the site, and our plans are not for hydropower. It's for fish passage, lowering the dam, and again, improving that portage through that area there. So we're working on that letter now. We intend to have that out to FERC right around the end of the month, so pretty soon at this point.
Jason, you're going to copy the applicant?
We will, yes.
So One Drop Hydro will see that?
Correct. Yep. Okay, next slide. There were a couple of questions, so I've got a couple of slides with similar questions here, so I won't dwell on, I won't repeat myself, but there was a discussion about removing Elizabeth Webbing Dam altogether. And so, certainly in the realm of possibility, but we've not been focused on that at this point. I'll come back to that in a minute, but the reason we've not been thinking about a complete removal at the site is, number one, we have an agreement with the condo owner. The agreement was codified when we purchased the property, and that agreement specifies not lowering more than 2 feet. I think the way it's worded is not, or at least 2 feet, but it specifies 2 feet. So we're kind of looking at 2 feet. So I'll leave it at that. So there's an agreement that exists, specifies 2 feet. The reason for the 2 feet is the condo association, they like the noise. That's why that kind of exists. Thinking about it a little bit, we also have concerns about the impacts to wetlands upriver, because we've not really studied, like, if we remove the dam, how far in would the river channel come and what effects would those have, which could create problems with DEM actually in their wetlands rules. So we need to think through that. Not saying it couldn't be, but we would need to understand the effects of that a little bit better. And then finally, we would need a little more information about the efficacy of fish passage if there were to be a dam removal. So for instance, we were thinking there are situations where you could remove the dam and given how things have evolved over history at that site, it may not be conducive to fish getting by that area if there's a lot of bedrock or what have you. So just a couple, there's other reasons as well, like sediment contamination and things like that. All of that, I think, could be resolved through potentially an incremental analysis at Elizabeth Webbing. When we're thinking about options, we could look at various options in increments. But there's kind of, we need to start to align on some options here so that we can hone in on what exactly we want to see. So that's where we're at on that one. Next slide. So I did just touch on this. So I've not talked, the property owner is Lewis Yip, who's a pretty big property owner up in Central Falls, Kentucky area. So I have not talked to him yet, but I will. I just don't want to do that before I know what I'm talking to him about. So I'm kind of waiting to get a little more structure into what we're talking about here, which this group is a part of, before I do that. But I will. I do intend on doing that. Next slide. So this is a repeat. So what I will say here is, thinking about a complete removal we would need agreement from the condo owner before we'd be able to do that, because we have an existing agreement that we DEM has signed as well as him. And so, I was thinking there could be an opportunity if we could say, look, we can mimic the noise. We can have it set up to continue to make the noise of the water kind of going through riffles instead of going over a dam, if that is the only concern. But again, I want to be a little bit further along with what we're thinking about and understanding. I don't want to get into a conversation about this if in the end it's going to be like DEM that's going to say, oh no, you can't do that because of the wetlands impacts. So I just kind of want to understand that a little bit more first. Next slide. Okay, there was a question about there being an opportunity for the FERC applicant to fund the fish passage. So if the FERC license were to be granted, which would include a condemnation of parts of DEM's property here for that, I think, and I'm not an expert on stuff, but I think it would be a requirement of the license that they would have to plan for fish passage at the site. However, it changes things. Like right now we own it, so we can optimize fish passage based on what we want to do. If a license ends up getting granted here, there's a condemnation for that. We don't get the final say here. It becomes a negotiation of what happens there. Likely would not include a lowering of the dam, which I'll touch on in a moment here. And it would probably collapse the options down to, I'm thinking, the only viable option at that point, if you're going to leave the dam and you're going to use the existing powerhouse for hydropower, you'd be talking about a Danielle fish wing of some sort, which is kind of the standard one you see like on the Manasquatucket cement structure that sort of gets up and over the dam. So it kind of removes options for us, but they would, I think, have to fund it. Just trade-off. Next slide. A question came up about why 2 feet needs to come off for fish passage, and it doesn't. However, any lowering of the dam increases the probability of success in a number of different fronts, like funding. So a lot of the funding currently in recent past that is being put out by the federal government, they want dam removal, to be blunt about it. They want the complete structure removed. Now, we're not talking about that here so far. We're talking about partial removal, but partial removal is better than no removal. So that helps with some of those funding opportunities. It creates less of a challenge for passing fish in a bioenergetics or biological context. They won't have as much head to have to get through to get up above the dam. So there are benefits for the fish. It creates less need for putting structures in the water. So, the higher the dam is, the more structures you would need to kind of get the fish up and over that dam. And then because of that, the more stuff you have to do, the more expensive it is, sort of intuitive. So if you lower the dam, it likely would decrease the cost relative to that. Just a couple of quick responses to that. Next slide, and this is my last slide. And so this one is quick. This question was on there, and it was, are there still hydraulic issues with Elizabeth Webbing? I don't know what that means or what they're referring to. So whoever asked that question, if you want to speak up and add more detail, we can chase that one down. I just didn't know how to answer that one.
I didn't ask that, but I think that they were asking about, you mentioned that there was equipment leaking in the powerhouse at one point.
Oh, yeah. So I can speak to that.
I think that's, if I'm wrong, someone correct me, but I think that's what it's asking.
Okay. Oh, thanks, Stephanie. So yeah, that one I can answer. So that is true. There is So right now there is a hydropower equipment facility on this dam. It's on the river right side where the big green polygon was. So within there, the equipment is still there, including the big turbine and everything. So something within the equipment is leaking. And so the facility, the building itself has water in it. So there is, we don't know if it's, we think what it is just from the folks who've been down there. We had our EMA folks visit because there is a little bit of sheen on the surface of the water in there. It's not leaking out, but there is a sheen. So we wanted to make sure, we wanted to see what it was. It's hydraulic oil. It does not have PCBs in it. So we had that tested. But it appears that depending on the height of the river outside is pushing water hydraulically into that facility through some leak in the equipment. It does not appear to be going back out. But that's what we know about that situation at that site. So we are thinking about dealing with, we definitely want to get the water out of there with oil so that doesn't end up being an issue for the river. But before we kind of have plans on what we're going to do, we need to sequence it correctly because we don't want to like empty it and then have it just fill back up again and have to repeat that over and over again. So we want to sort of have some time horizon so we can sequence it in when we know we'll be able to get in there and fix things and stop leaks and sort of thing. So that's all I've got. Stephanie, happy to follow up on any of it or whatever.
There's a comment in the chat from Kate. She said, is Rydam planning on creating a public park at Elizabeth Webbing since there's a public access easement?
Yeah. So that was from Kate. Yes, Kate. I think we are, and we're actually trying to think about how we could actually name it something. So we could give it a name and create a nice little area. The issue there is, I think we do have deeded access to some parking, but it's not much. I think it's maybe even like 2 or 3 spots. So, we have to be a little careful. We can't attract like hordes of people into this area, but the idea of being able to paddle the river and get around this obstruction through some nice park-like area is definitely something that's on our mind.
Other questions from everything that Jason went over?
One quick question, the funding with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, did they give any type of answer as to why, or were they saying like, you guys don't have fish coming here yet, so we're not going to throw money at it?
Yeah, no, good question. Good question, Kevin. So we actually met with them. I may have mentioned that last time that we were going to try to do that. We did do that. We met with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and asked them for some feedback on why we didn't rank. And I guess what I can tell you is we actually ranked in like a normal situation. We ranked really well. Like the score was pretty good. And that's what the feedback that we got. Your score, like in a normal year, would have been pretty good. It probably would have gotten funded, but there was such an overwhelming response to that last RFP that there were just so many others that ranked even higher. Even some of those they had to, they weren't able to fund just because they have only so much money and there was so much demand. So that gave me some comfort that we were like, in the ballpark. But there were a couple of other things. So not being a complete removal, that's one thing they kind of highlighted. And they gave us some other feedback. I'm trying to recall like the key ones, but they're not sticking in my head really because the big take home was you guys did okay. It's just that there was just such an overwhelming response this time around. There was, I will actually offer you one opinion that I had. There was, we had a little bit of back and forth. They have these 2 criteria that they score you on. One was removal, and then another was environmental justice. And so what I sort of talked to them about was those could be competing, like completely competing trade-offs, because, you know, my sense is your projects that will show up in an environmental justice area tend to be urbanized, tend to have hardened channels, probably won't be able to do dam removals in those areas. So you're taking points away from us, giving us points at the same time. And so it's a weird trade-off for me. So I'm actually going to talk to U.S. Fish and Wildlife leadership about that to see if they can accommodate that a little bit in their next RFP, or for their next RFP in their scoring criteria, because it seemed to be like they were like competing. So that was it. It was a good discussion. I don't know if we ever received, I did request the actual scoring, the sheets that they did, so that we can have those. We had a nice discussion with them, but even like right now, I'm trying to recall, it was a couple weeks ago, so I don't exactly remember all of the sort of intricate details, but we'll get those scores from them, and then next time we apply, we'll be able to look at where we lost points to see if we can bolster those parts of our application.
You're going to be creating some access upriver for that same amount on Prince Street eventually. So I don't know if that would help with his access upriver. Would that help taking the access away from your site? If you did have it upriver.
Yeah. I'm not suggesting, John, that there is an issue right now. I think we just want to improve it, kind of make it more, give it more of a aesthetic, nice park kind of look to it. But so, I'm not suggesting there's an issue with access there. I will say that if there is access upriver, that's fantastic too. Like, people will have options. Maybe they only want to go a mile, and so they can do that, or maybe they want to go further and they can do that.
Any other questions? John, did you want to talk about what we have funding for right now and what we know is happening on Elizabeth Webbing versus what we
Absolutely. Yeah.
are maybe looking toward?
Yeah, by way of review, I think you know this, let's go over it one more time. The Nature Conservancy has 2 contracts with Fuss and O'Neill. One contract is to work on Main Street and Slater Mill, and it's being funded by DEM, the bond funds, Bay and Watershed Restoration Funding. And the funding is such that it allows Fuss and O'Neill to go in and look at fish passage on both of those dams. And you know the story, a single vertical slot fish ladder that will come enter from below Main Street and go overland and then go into the head pond at Slater Mill. And by year's end, Fuss and O'Neill will provide us with a detailed memo or report. They call it a technical report that brings this to 60% design, which is necessary for permit documents, and they'll provide the permit docs and help through the permitting process. So that will get to 60% design and permitting with the current funding that's in that.
So regardless of whether we get the NOAA funding or not, we are going through permitting?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
And you need 60% design, I guess, and Niels can chip in, but you get 60% design, you do the permit docs, you go to permitting, and then there may be a little negotiation, and that requires some changes in the design to go to final design before bidding. We're getting the 60% design and permit docs. That's the goal with that one. Now, the other contract that we have with Fuss and O'Neill is for Elizabeth Webbing, and that is from the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program. It was a direct award that came right to the Conservancy, and it provided enough funding to look at alternatives, preliminary information. And Nils can go through this, but he looked at survey and bathymetry, wetland delineation, cultural resources, but it stops. It stops there. That's it. So you don't get as far as you're going to get with Main Street Elizabeth Webbing. Now, we did have a meeting, it was last week, with Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, and they sort of alluded to the fact that there will be additional funding in that direct award that will allow us to complete Elizabeth Webbing to the same stage that both Main Street and Slater Mill will be, which means that we're going to have 3 dams that have 60% design and permits ready to go. So that's kind of the extent of it. So we're anticipating change order to the current direct award that we have with Narragansett Bay Estuary Program to get more funding to carry their preliminary up to 60% design.
So my question then is, I'm hearing we have a potential alternatives analysis that's including vertical slot fishway and nature like fishway, right?
Right.
And then we're hearing that, you know, removal might be an option. There are a lot of barriers in that way. Is removal being considered as one of those alternatives that are being explored?
Well, I think that will come out in some of the reallocation that Nils is talking about with the current work that we're doing. We're going to decrease the investment into Valley Falls and focus solely on Elizabeth Webbing. And we really need to know more about partial or full dam removal in the sense that you have to do borings, take a look at sediments, and you have to take a look at models and hydrology to understand what's going to happen. And that's what Jason called it incremental analysis. What happens when you take off 2 feet? What happens if you go to 3 or 4 or all of it? And that's, you know, going to be integrated into the current contract. That it's not there now, but that'll be added to it.
So as we refine that contract and define what the alternatives will be, removal will be considered in this incremental
And the
design.
incremental analysis,
And
yes.
we have funding for that. That's
Yeah,
happening.
we don't have funding for it now.
That would be a future funding.
That is the funding that we hope to get,
Okay.
that they alluded to at last week's meeting with the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program.
So
That they will take the existing direct award that we have and add to that.
So we have funding for like field survey, delineation, resources.
Yes,
And then it's,
and a conceptual analysis of vertical slot fishway and the nature light fishway.
I guess I'm just confused about that part of this. What does a conceptual analysis include? Is it just like, it could go here, like highlighting on a map
No,
and then?
I think it, you know, we can ask Nils, I think it goes to 20 or 30% design. But it really doesn't give you more detailed information that allows you to put it on the table and say, okay, this is the preferred alternative that we have selected, and we're going out to permitting with this.
I'm just looking up there.
I have questions, I have follow-up questions about the Main Street and Slater. I have questions about the Main Street and Slater Dam 60%. What is included in that 60% design? Does it include elevations for the research station and things that are on the lot besides the fishway?
No, it doesn't. There are ideas that were thrown out, there were suggestions that were thrown out, and I don't think we ever got to the point where we wanted to talk about the impact it has on the viewshed and what is actually needed by DEM to satisfy a monitoring station.
Right.
What's the minimum amount that would be able to offset any significant change in the appearance of the park?
Okay, so right, we haven't gotten far in those
No.
discussions, but those aren't part of that 60%, so that will happen in the future.
I'm sure that there'll be some concepts that'll be included in that.
So are those conversations we should have before the 60% is finalized?
I think so. I think that we started talking about that, but that didn't continue.
Okay,
You
well,
know, I think that that's an issue
should
that has to be addressed.
Okay.
And it's something that we do with the contractor so that they can carefully integrate that into the design work and the submission.
of course,
So we really know what's going to be there.
Right.
And I think it's part of their cultural resources, due diligence on cultural resources.
right, because we want this to proceed as smoothly as it can through permitting and all of those things, and we want your money to go as far as possible. So having those conversations earlier in the
That's a good
process helps everything go faster down the line. We don't want to waste your money. Anyone's money, right? It's
Yeah.
better to talk about it sooner.
I just to offer a comment, and nothing, I'm completely aligned with what John had been talking about. So, yeah, for me, it was, there's like two components of it, right? There's the, what needs to happen on the actual structure of the fishway part of it. That needs to be like 100% integrated into how they kind of design it and engineer it and all of that. And then how you get to that, you know, I think it could actually be a completely separate project. It probably will be fairly expensive, like not in the grand scheme of like the whole thing, but so I see them as, you know, kind of two. So I'm agreeing with everything you guys said. We should start talking about that. There's really not, I think we're kind of in a holding pattern on that stuff, waiting for NOAA. By the way, I'll just mention that we did get a sense that the NOAA funding results, I guess, will be this summer at some point. So further out than I thought, but that's what I heard.
But from a design point of view, everything matters. I don't mean from an aesthetic point of view, I mean from a, you know, on the ground setbacks, measurement, you know, everything.
Yep,
So
totally.
it's worth, you know, talking about a little bit, and I wonder what, maybe Nils has some input, but, you know, I wonder just what has been going on, so it would be good just to update us.
Yep.
And then I think there were a couple of other nuances that I'm not quite sure got resolved, and it does pertain to fish passage in that design, which had to do with water usage during periods of low water resources in the pond, and adding things like boards that could be removed and added. And you know, we're moving forward with the water wheel project, and I don't think there was there really wasn't a conflict between, you know, water wheel and fish passage as it turned out, but these are important things to talk about with the design, just to go over and make sure it's all seen.
Totally.
So now that we've talked about Main Street and Slater, we talked about Elizabeth Webbing, got some more details on that. Are there questions about, or not just questions, are there comments, right? It's a conversation. You're an advisory committee, we're an advisory committee. Are there thoughts, opinions on, you know, what we're doing? What's next?
I think any type of update from Pawtucket as the new landowner, maybe, I don't know, would be great. So Mike Cassidy, hate to put you on the spot, but I know you know everything about it.
Yes. Not only do I'm planning consultant to Department of Planning and Redevelopment. I also we staff the Pawtucket Redevelopment Agency. The redevelopment agency owns the former Slater Mill property on Lower Broadway. From what I've seen from the Fuss and O'Neill permitting, plans rather, preliminary plans. The fish ladder that's proposed would go across pretty much all of that property. So I asked Niles if, in order to go for your permitting, do you need to have control of the property where you propose to put the fish ladder? Because right now, there is no easement on that property to allow for a fish ladder. Not to say that we wouldn't be willing to have a discussion about that, but since we just took control of the property, that's one of the reasons the old Slater Mill Association had not been engaging with you about the fish ladder, because they knew they were going to transfer the property. The redevelopment agency basically owns all of the former Apex property, and including the tire center, and there's a small funeral home. Basically, we own everything from 95 to the river, along School Street and Walcott Street and Lower Broadway. It will be a development property. I expect that Apex will be demolished. We've already demolished one building out there at 101 Main Street. That's down. And so we were going to be offering the property for redevelopment. It is, so far our discussions have been, is our intention to pretty much leave the park area that we just bought from the Slater Mill Association open. We wanted to control the property in case we have to do some street changes. We may change the traffic pattern out there, but we don't intend to have a development or anything built necessarily on a major part of that lot. Our agreement also with the Slater Mill Association requires the redevelopment agency to provide a view shed so that you can still see the Slater Mill as you come around the corner of the Main Street Bridge. We are in the process of surveying the property, and then we will lay out a view shed. Basically, what that would be is that an area that the redevelopment agrees and assures the old Slater Mill Association that no building will be built on that portion of the lot, which would obstruct the view of the Slater Mill. So that's what's going on in Pawtucket with regard to the Main Street and Slater Mill Dam fish passage. We also are working on a project at Elizabeth Webbing. And if Molly can put that PowerPoint back up and go to the slide that shows DEM's ownership, I think it would be easier for you to understand what I'm about to tell you about our plans at Elizabeth Webbing.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Yep.
Are you seeing that?
Yes, yeah, we got it.
Okay. And you want to see this page?
Yes, slide 3. Yep. Great. You can't blow that up, can you?
Yeah, right that way.
Oh, that's good. Okay. All right. So the city of Pawtucket is currently going through the preliminary review process to permit a bikeway, part of the Blackstone River Bikeway. It would complete, it would add to the bikeway and connect to the bikeway into Providence that currently exists on Taft Street and up through back into Providence. Our plan is to, on the southerly I'm sorry, on the eastern side of the property, you see that mill building. We would go all along the river at the edge of that parking lot. Colette owns the big building there, and there's a condo association that owns the next building. Our plan right now, we have laid out a plan that would bring the bikeway along that top of that slope, and just south of that green area that on the easterly side that DEM owns, we would build a pedestrian bridge. And the pedestrian bridge would go across and it would land right at the rear of that mill building in that little grassy area you see there. Yeah, right there. Okay. And we would have a switchback. That's one of the plans. The other plan is to go to that grassy area with the bridge, and then go across the parking lot on basically a boardwalk. Keep it, because when you come, we're way off grade. We're very much higher on the easterly side than the westerly side. So we need to get the bikeway down. What we're looking at now is going across the parking lot and in the northerly direction. And the Narragansett Bay Commission did a load of work on that property. And when they did, if you go up to the street and that little building that's on the street there that adjacent to the parking lot, a little further over. Yeah, that one. You see that sort of undeveloped area next to it? NBC came in and graded that so they could drive their trucks down. And what we would do is bring the bikeway across the parking lot and then bring the bikeway down till it gets to the level of that area. And then the bikeway will go up onto Roosevelt Avenue. Central Falls plans to bring their bikeway up on the westerly side of the river on Charles Street that's there and connect and connect to the city's bikeway. Currently, VHB has been talking to Army Corps of Engineers on Historic Preservation and looking at if we could permit that. The Army Corps of Engineers' response has been that as long as we stay out of the river, they don't have a say, and where the bridge abutments would not be in the river, everything would be above. What we plan to do on the easterly side, when we make the transition across the river, we plan to put a park there so that you have an overview. Yeah, right there. Actually, there's a street, Carnation Street, comes down and extends all the way to the river, basically. And the city owns that, plus we own a 50-foot right-of-way going north all along the river's edge. I don't know how much of that 50-foot right-of-way is still there, but we do own enough around that Carnation Street area and around the DEM property there that we intend to put a park there. So those plans right now are, as I said, we're looking to permit it to go through the process. The city has $7 million scheduled in the state transportation improvement program for this section of the bikeway beginning in October of 2026. So we're looking at the permitting process now in anticipation of going to the permitting process this year for preliminary stuff. And then we will go to the design and plans for the construction project. So we are ready to build it in 2026, 2027. So that's what Pawtucket's doing.
Is there anybody else that wants to see this map up before I go back over to Zoom?
There was a comment in the chat, and Kate, you're welcome to take yourself off mute if you want instead too.
Well, I just wanted to say, Mike, if you have a drawing of that anywhere, when you do have some kind of, well, drawing of that, I guess, that would be nice to see, like a schematic or something to understand it better.
We do, yes, we do have we've done a lot of preliminary work out here. We do have a plan that shows where the bikeway would go from Tolman High School, which is on Exchange Street, and the Exchange Street Bridge, all the way to here where the bridge would go. We also looked at the alternative of putting the bikeway on the 50-foot right-of-way and then bringing it around up onto Roosevelt Avenue. But that's the slope out there is very steep, and we don't know how much of the right-of-way is actually still there. So we would have to do some property acquisition from the neighbors whose backyard come down, not to the river, but to our what was basically was supposed to be a roadway. That's a 50-foot right of way from the road that never got built, obviously. So we think the best alternative is to not try and do that and come and do the pedestrian bridge and come up onto Roosevelt Avenue where we would connect to Central Falls.
Just to mention,
Tucking to Central Falls are the last two sections of the Blackstone River Bikeway that haven't been built yet, and one small section in Woonsocket. So Central Falls is working on their bikeway piece, and we've been working on our bikeway piece for about 10 years now. We actually have a construction contract to start a piece of it from Exchange Street south to Main Street, and then Main Street along Roosevelt Avenue down to the new soccer complex.
yeah, don't worry. We have miles and miles left in Massachusetts to build too. We're way behind you on the bikeway.
Yes, I know you guys are way behind. But we're trying to get the Tucket pieces done. The urban areas were the last ones because they're the hardest to do.
Yeah. So I know we only have a few minutes left here. I just quickly, Kate mentioned in the chat that any clear and grading disturbance in the buffer of the Blackstone would need a ride-in permit, even if not Army Corps. And
Yes,
thinking
we're aware of that. We've actually already walked the route with RIDEM staff, and so we have a pretty good idea of what we can and cannot do. They actually were okay. They haven't signed off on it, but they like the idea because we also would clean out a lot of the invasive species that are along the riverbank, and we would plant appropriate plantings there.
great. And if there's any opportunity to think about how we're incorporating kayak access into that bikeway access as well, and maybe there's a way to get additional funds that are needed, but leveraging that existing work. So maybe there's
unfortunately on the section that we're doing, the slope is pretty steep all along this area. You'd be difficult to get a kayak landing anywhere on the easterly side of the river from Elizabeth Webbing Dam down to the Main Street Dam.
Yeah, I've put in my kayak there a couple times and it is not easy, but any way to improve.
There is at Exchange Street where we were putting the bikeway on Exchange Street. We just put in a park there, and there is at that area, there is a very low area on the westerly side, right at the Main Street Bridge, that the fire department uses to put their boat in, a little boat, a rowboat, if they have to go into the river to get anything or anybody. And so that area we've always looked at as an opportunity to put a kayak area there, because Of course, you can't go very far. You can go a couple of blocks and get to Slater Mill Dam, and then you can go up to the Elizabeth Webbing Dam. But there is an area that we've always looked at as a potential to put a kayak landing in that would get you into that portion of the river.
Mike, I hate to cut you off. I know we just have 1 minute left, and I don't want to take up everybody's time. Helpful background there. So just a few quick follow-ups. I know that we skipped those sort of updates on things that we said that we're going to give you that we're working on. So renderings, sometime coming soon. We can think about what a timeline looks like for that. Getting an update of all the questions that we had. We went over the Elizabeth Webbing ones today, but there are more. We're working on that. There's a one-pager of the efficacy of the vertical slot fishway we're working on. So apologies that we don't have those today, but hopefully have them soon. We also, I think there's some website updates that are still pending to talk about the existing Fish Passage Parade coming up in May. We can work on those. And then for funding, there were some questions I've had with other folks about, I know that DEM's maybe looking at an earmark for funding, which is an exciting opportunity. We've talked in Narragansett Bay Estuary Program about potentially hiring through DEM a contractor of a 1-year project manager for this project so that we have someone who's kind of thinking about this all the time, because none of us are thinking about this all the time. It's hard. So that's another opportunity we can give you an update on. And then there was a question about like, how do we get other state support? We know that if we get this fish passage, we get all these different migratory species here, and it improves the North Atlantic and all the forage fish there, or forage base there. How can we get Connecticut involved, or Massachusetts, or New York, or whomever else involved? And so there's this bigger picture question here of, we don't have the answer to that, but I know that it's been on some of your minds. The
DEM website on Fish Passage right now talks about last year's Fish Parade, but we would really like it if it could talk about the upcoming Fish Parade in April. We would love that.
Yep.
Is that way people look to see it?
You got it. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll just need some content, but
yeah, I can send again. The last thing is that we have a colleague at Verdantis Labs in Holden, Massachusetts, formerly Alden Lab, and I guess they're working with Fuss and O'Neill on Fish Passage, and they do a lot of design and testing there, and it's a huge facility, and they've offered the collaborative a tour, and we're able to bring up to 20 people, so I wanted to offer it to this group first before I offered it to anybody just like who's kind of interested in from the collaborative. So they don't have a timeline, but if anyone is interested, please let me know, and I can send out like a poll of finding dates and times. It's in Holden, Massachusetts, so probably maybe like 45 minutes from here, maybe an hour. But happy to set that up with him.
I'm interested
Yeah.
in doing that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone online that, Kate, great. Great. Well, I can send it out to everybody, and then whoever responds, and we can set it up. And maybe I'll just pick a couple people outside of this group to attend as well. But sorry, talking really fast, trying to wrap up. I know we're all so late here, but let's plan on our next meeting, which is the third Thursday in April. So Thursday, April 18th, same thing, 11:30 to 12:30. And we'll work to get you the notes from this meeting and a draft agenda for the next one. Are there specific things that you want to talk about and focus on in the next meeting?
Well, we're going to follow up separately with the discussion of the dams, the Main Street tax, or is that a subject for this meeting?
The view shed?
60% design view shed issues, yeah.
Yeah, let me work with Nils. And I think maybe this is a conversation you start with Nils.
Okay.
Okay. There's a lot of flexibility in doing this. We want to do it the right way. We want to make sure that this is done so it satisfies the needs of DEM to monitor the run, to sample, to evaluate returns, to put in monitors, videos, and at the same time, we don't want structure there that takes away from the view shed.
And part of the conversation has to be our friends in Pawtucket as
Right.
well,
Right, I
now
was
that they
gonna
have
say,
a view shed
shoot.
easement
Right.
Yeah.
being able to see the mill from
Yeah,
across the river.
Sounds like Mike Cassidy should be part of.
Right,
the
I mean,
meeting as well.
right now, without talking about monitoring station, it's basically all level with ground, fish passing.
Yes.
Okay, with grading over it. And maybe there's options to provide, and if this is done in other areas, an access below ground.
Right.
Okay, steps going down.
Right.
With window, with the monitor in there.
Right.
The ability to manipulate boards to extract fish, sample, replace.
Right.
I mean, all that needs to be done,
Right.
but it doesn't need a building
Right.
to do
But-
that.
Okay, so yeah, let's let the meeting end, but I think it really does call for another meeting because
Yes.
it's probably a,
Well, we can do that on, the 18th, if you want that to be a major agenda item, and the advisory team can brainstorm that.
Yeah, we'll get that out in the notes, and I think depending on how many of those follow-up items we get to you as well, I think we'll probably spend a portion of it looking at what do the renderings look, okay, if we don't have that, what do the FAQ look like, or the one pager, and having feedback, so, great. So thank you, everybody, we'll see you again on April 18th, and we'll send you notes and agendas before then.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice to see everyone.
thank you.
Thank you. Take care.